Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 11 of Capitalism, where we've been, where we are, where we're going, and now we're to the where we're going. And it's fair to ask, how can I pretend to know where we're going? And the answer is, well, in part, of course, who knows what's going to happen. But the other part of that answer is, no, we have a lot of very good historical sort of loose corollaries to what we've been experiencing. Lots of systems have been widely adopted, seemed universal, and then sort of fallen apart and been replaced by other systems. And so this is a kind of known in the sense that they're analogical. They're not, exactly the same to what we're experiencing now. And so we can just a few examples so that you can see what I'm talking about is, the Reformation was the big split with capitalism, with Catholicism, and that changed fundamentally, basically set the course for European culture and civilization for the next, where are we now, 500 years. You can look at something like the influence that Zoroastrianism had on Islam, so that Zoroastrianism had been around for, centuries before Islam conquered the areas that culturally had been Zoroastrian. And so Zoroastrianism continues until today, shockingly enough, but continued as a broad-based religion for a long time after the rulers were nominally Muslim. And then even after most of the population was Muslim, many elements of Persian society and Persian culture related to Zoroastrianism in particular was absorbed into Islam. So even though that was theoretically gone, it's still, we can know how that impact worked. You can look at the works of people like, say, Junichiro Tanizaki, if you read his In Praise of Shadows, or some prefer Nettles, one a short nonfiction work, one a long fiction work, or Yasunari Kawabata, basically all of his work. So to lesser or greater degrees, depending, the Old Capital, Sound of the Waves, Snow Country, Thousand Crane. I believe he even said once that everything he wrote was an elegy for the Meiji Restoration. And so one form of Japanese culture was sort of replaced and destroyed by the militarism that led up to World War II and by modernization. So you can't blame it all on militarization. It was also modernization, the coming of the modern sort of industrial world. And so in each of these cases, we have examples where you had one very well-established, grounded, socially integrated system and outlook that included an economy and a politics and a worldview that was then radically changed and transformed. And so what you see in all this is not the dream of the revolution. French Revolution, we could also use that as an example. So when people talk about the change, when they talk about, something new coming, what they tend to look at is, there's going to be this revolution and then everything is going to change. Historically, this occasionally happens, but it's pretty rare and usually takes killing lots and lots and lots of people to do anything like this. And even then it's tricky. So it took the communist Russia or communist Soviet Union a long time to collectivize the farms, and they had to kill millions of people to try and break that old system of the way peasants had organized themselves for, millennia. And so it was not an easy lift, and it took a long time. And again, it was at a spectacularly horrendous cost to try and do this. And so, and again, even then, it was only partially ever, successful, or quote unquote. I don't know if we can call these kinds of things successful. So what do these examples lead us to expect? One, this transition period of going from one system, let's say a capitalist-dominated system, to something else, generally isn't like, one day you're capitalist, the next day you're socialist. It's generally, you have this period of confusion and conflict, which of course, how could you avoid this in a way? Sometimes military, sometimes just cultural. and in the technological, like again, when you look at the decline of the society and social mores of Meiji Restoration, Japan, a lot of it was technological as much as anything else. Is why, if you want to read about this, In Praise of Shadows is just a brilliant meditation on the coming of these kinds of forces. What you realize is that even if, which of course is unlikely, that there was an overnight change, we would still be us, right? This is one of the key things to keep in mind. As we move into the future, we take us with us, unless we die, which of course, well, there you go, solves all problems. But, generally speaking, we go as us. And so even if like money and capitalism were eliminated tomorrow somehow magically, we would not be different in ourselves. It would take a long time for our patterns and thought behaviors and outlooks and all of these habitual elements to go away, to fade, to no longer be relevant to us. Generally, these kinds of changes take generations because it's so difficult. Once these patterns get ingrained into you, it's very difficult. And this is why I talked about the rise of capitalism. It took generations of people to change their outlook and mores under the pressure of capitalism and technological development and political change, all of which again go together to create a new kind of person who participates in this, and then the feedback loop keeps rolling. And so it's not a thing. It's not one, element that can be changed and then, hey, presto, everything is different. No, it's these whole patterns of life and outlook and behavior and culture and technology, and all of this is, intertwined. And so when you change part of it, you're going to influence everything, but we don't magically become different. So no matter what happens, we'll still be us. And it takes a long time and generally generations to make these changes. It does not happen overnight. 2, just because something is attacked, criticized, cut down to size, power reduced, all of that doesn't mean it goes away. So you can, again, think of the Reformation. I mean, the Reformation was a major, we're talking at least a century of warfare and political unrest and revolutions and just, burnings at the stakes and just everything, all the chaos and power struggles and you could possibly want. The end of which is you got the rise of a new church that told the Catholic Church it just didn't need it anymore. So that was 500 years ago. We still have a Catholic Church hanging around, right? Despite the fact that it lost half the Europe, a lot of population, however you want to count it, the Catholic Church really, really lost the Reformation. And yet, 500 years later, give or take, the Catholic Church has like 1 billion, has some ridiculous number of people who believe in it. It's a very large number, right? And you go, okay, so it's not that the Catholic Church is still around, but it's not around in the way it was before the Reformation. So this is the important thing to keep in mind, is that the way the Catholic Church views itself, it changed, and the way the Catholic Church viewed the world changed, and the way people viewed the Catholic Church changed, and the way other churches viewed, all of this was transformed, but the Catholic Church still exists. It's still a going concern. It still has hundreds of millions, if not 1 billion-ish adherents. So, they just got a new pope, which made the news globally. Why did it make the news globally? Because, 500 years later, the Catholic Church still really, really matters. And so you can look at something like that and go, oh, right, like this is not going to be different tomorrow. This is not, it can change. It can have dramatic. People keep talking about, oh, it's the collapse of the capitalist system. Oh, it's the collapse of the international finance. Oh, we love this catastrophe theory. We love the collapse. It's all over. It's all going to end. Everything is going to be dead, right? And we're going to be able to build anew. Generally those kinds of events in history, while they have happened, you don't want to participate in them. They've tended to be very, very unpleasant for everyone involved. And two, basically this is what Pol Pot was trying to do, right? So he tried to kill as many of his citizens as necessary so that he could create an agrarian paradise. The downside of this was it turned out to be almost all of his citizens, right? I mean, like this is horrifying dedication to this ideal, but he did make a collapse. He did, try desperately. He did everything he could to recreate well, it didn't recreate, it never existed, but this imaginary world of agrarian purity in which everyone would be happy. But, even Pol Pot couldn't pull this off, killing just as many people as he could, as fast as he could. I mean, think about how terrifying that is. But to break the patterns of society is virtually impossible, right? And when people give it a real try, when people really do try to destroy things, that's when you get these horrible events in world history. So we're hoping that doesn't happen. I would say, because it would be probably unpleasant for everyone that participates. So what you will see, and this is where my argument comes in, using these analogies as to inform this, is one, again, it takes a generation or two for these changes to really take hold, because it's widespread, it's deeply embedded, it has staying power, and by the way, it solves problems. This is one of the magics of, a system like capitalism functions because it does so many things well. And it's hard to replace things that work well for some things, but poorly for others, if you want to say that, until you've got something that kind of takes care of those things as well, right? Like you see the problem, like capitalism does a spectacular job of distributing a lot of goods and services, like unbelievably efficient. The downside of that is some goods and services it's terrible at distributing. Healthcare, springs to mind. Housing, obviously, seemed to be pretty good. Now it doesn't work anymore. These sorts of issues. But for other goods and services, it really is just unimaginably good. And so if you use a historical example like a command economy where you just order people around and tell them, make this many cars, make that many mopeds, make this many coffee filters, and then that's what's available. It turns out it has not worked nearly as well. The command economy turns out generally to function very poorly in some ways, not in every way though, and that's important to note. So we're not likely to abandon those parts of capitalism because they do function so well until we can find something that functions at least moderately good. Because this is where the damage takes place, is when you go, well, this is bad, so we're going to get rid of everything. Well, then what do you do with the things that actually were sort of moderately functional? And so one way to conceptualize this is we're going to, and I would argue we already are, starting to incorporate more complex, more subtle, more variety of modes of economy, relationship to economies, ideas about economies into our worldview. So the best example I think that you're seeing at the moment is the widespread adoption of what they call renewable or sustainable forms of energy. And the idea here is severalfold. So if you look at some place like Europe, it's been adopting very aggressive programs to encourage people to put solar and wind and some more hydroelectric projects. So those have tended to be small scale, but a lot of small scale hydroelectric projects end up being a lot of hydroelectric. Depending how you want to count nuclear, right? Very controversial, I know, but they're also sort of getting a little more aggressive on that on some fronts. And but what is driving this? A couple of fold. One, a concern with global warming. So this is a problem. This is much higher on the European agenda than it is on the American agenda, but it's a real issue. But notice it's sort of potentially outside the normal purview of capitalism, and this is certainly being driven by government regulation and government interference in the energy markets, which have not traditionally priced in the cost of global warming, of course. Two is they're very interested in energy independence, or at least quasi-independence, because increasingly they've realized that the political risks of having your economy exposed to players like Russia and the Middle East for oil is high, right? Like this is really dangerous. And so even though it might cost more, have other non-financial benefits that theoretically capitalism, like, well, it's just too expensive, just free market, buy it on the open market, take care of business. European governments are increasingly going, no, we're willing to pay a risk premium because what we don't want to be exposed to that. We are willing to make changes to our entire energy system so that we can free ourselves from that kind of permanent dependence on foreign powers over which we have little control. And so the combination of those two things, the notion of trying to address environmental issues and trying to create a greater sense of sovereignty, functionally is what it amounts to, has led to a very heavy social shift towards electrification of things like cars and wind and solar power, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that comes at the cost of government interference, regulation, promotion, however you want to think about that. And it's like, oh, okay. So notice it's not like the end of capitalism, right? They aren't stepping in and saying we're not going to have any electricity markets. We're not going to have fuel markets. We're not going to allow any trade in energy whatsoever. It's all going to be 100% controlled by the government, and it's going to tell you exactly how much power. See, none of that is really happening yet. Maybe it could happen in the future, but so far, not so much. But the governments are increasingly willing to step in and go, no, we're just not doing that. We're going to intervene very powerfully in the markets, and we're going to give all kinds of incentives because of these other elements that are theoretically extraneous to what would drive a pure capitalist market. And part of the resistance to these sorts of changes in the United States is they're like the fossil fuel industry is like, hey, this will cost us a bunch of money, which is true. And so, not unsurprisingly, they're lobbying and saying, "Hey, we don't. This is going to reduce our earnings. This is going to reduce the tax base. This is going to have all of the, make all of the standard arguments you make. Your GDP will go down. Your costs will go up. Employment will go down. Blah 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 blah." But we talked about the last two episodes, like just the standard straight argument that is always made about every subject in every moment. But here's a couple of issues. Sort of fiscal and sovereignty, the ability to control fundamental aspects of your economy, and environmental concerns all of a sudden are values that are coming to the fore and starting to complicate and limit and say, not so much. No, we know this is interfering with the markets. We know this is creating costs. We know this might shrink our GDP or at least, decelerate the growth of our GDP, but that's fine. But that's okay. And this is how you can tell, this is the flavor you're looking for when you're looking for alternatives, is when it's not that they say, although people do say this too, let's increase growth, it's the green market share, it's the Green New Deal, these sorts of things that are going to really make everything go and make everything boom and the economy is going to be great. That is an attempt to justify the change in terms of the old value set. Right? This will increase GDP. This will increase employment. This will increase all these other things. As long as you're making it on those terms of debate, then nothing has changed. But you do see, again, this is more, you read this and hear this more in Europe than you do in the United States, as far as I can tell. The argument has actually said, no, that we're okay. Like, we don't mind that it might reduce our GDP growth. We don't mind that it's going to incur extra costs. It's okay if it has some minor impact on employment. We're okay with paying more so that our business, we don't mind if our businesses are less profitable because they're paying more for energy. And once people start saying that, when you hear that, when they're like, no, that's fine. No, we agree. That's fine. Now you're starting to see a values change. And again, it's still pretty rare. I mean, it's still there, but mostly everybody wants to still justify it in terms of, over the long haul, wind energy is more efficient, and so we're going to get more energy input for less money, and this will lead to accelerated GDP growth, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of times now, or not a lot of times, but still sometimes you will hear people just flat out say, no, that's okay. We're good with whatever impact it has on GDP. We're just going to pay the price, make the transition, because we think overall this is just a good thing to do. You see this also in terms of agriculture with the use of chemicals versus biological, right? Sort of the organic standards, if you will, versus the spray all the pesticides you can standards. And again, traditionally, the argument has been, hey, this will produce more food versus, oh, no, organic will produce more food for less input. And so you get it, again, argued in the old terms. But now, again, you start having people feeling more willing to make arguments that actually are like, one good reason to use organics is they make the world more beautiful. We like butterflies, and we want more butterflies, not because butterflies do anything. It's just, of course, people will say they do things, but often people will now just say, no, we like butterflies because they're pretty. So let's go with the butterflies. Even if it costs a little more, we're okay with that because butterflies, right? We're willing to make that exchange. And so now that is when you can really know that an old system is failing, is when people are willing to accept the critique that the old system wants to offer of everything and then say, yeah, that's fine. So again, I used the example last time of Savonarola being burned at the stake because, or I don't know if he was burned at the stake. I'm not sure he was burned at the stake. He hung and burned. I don't know if it was at auto da fe or not. But because if the Catholic Church had written that letter and said, hey, we're going to basically threaten that every person in the city of Florence who does not participate in getting rid of this guy will not be able to go to heaven, you will be excommunicated. And if they had all said, yeah, that's good, that's fine, that's cool. Now you're like, oh, wait a second. Wait, now what do we do? Right? Like this is our big argument. This is our big trump card. And if people start going, okay, like I'm not even saying that's not true. We're just saying like, yeah, that we're fine with that. You can excommunicate us, and we think we've got other ways around that. We can be, our local priest can save us, or we don't really need the Pope to intervene anymore, or whatever it is. And so that's what you want to listen to. And so I think I think it's already underway, of course, I've mentioned this, but I think what we're moving towards is not one response or one idea or one big movement or one system. Rather, it's more like a reflorescence of lots of different ideas that are going to be jostling and slowly eroding from any number of different directions the unbelievable power and sort of the ideological monocropping that the capitalist outcome had achieved in much of the world. Not all of the world, of course. Many places didn't fall under this sway completely or nearly to the degree that the United States and much of the West did. But so then what comes and what happens after this moment is you start to get this rise of like, oh, well, once it becomes okay to say that butterflies are okay, then you can make other arguments, and it starts constraining the environment and environments in which people go, oh, no, that's a good place for capitalism to flourish. But you know what? Let's just really get it out of the medical system, right? Like it doesn't seem to be that helpful there. And it becomes this sort of slow unraveling. And again, this is what you see, generally speaking, is not the one-day overthrow, but rather you get this slow unraveling of the underlying value system that has made one ideology absolutely supreme and dominant in whatever areas where it is, and then it just slowly weakens and weakens and weakens until it just isn't the behemoth that it used to be. So the Catholic Church is not as strong as it was 500 years ago, but it's still around 500 years later. Many of its capacities over that time have simply unraveled. It doesn't make and unmake kings anymore. It doesn't make war anymore. It doesn't have the capacity. No one fears it enough to, aggressively attack. Like you don't invade the Vatican to overthrow the Catholic Church, because why would you? Historically, this was both done and tried many times, because you're like, yeah, that's a real center of power. A lot of that has gone away. Not all the power, of course, obviously, but a lot of it has gone away. And so that sensibility, that sense of, oh, where does the power lie? How important is it? How influential is it? So again, start listening to arguments that are made from that different set of values that say, hey, no, we can address this problem, or we have a creative solution, or we can come up with something new, but it just doesn't work under the old set. And when that argument is made, this doesn't help GDP growth, this doesn't, increase corporate profit, and everybody goes, oh, okay. That's fine. That's fine. We don't care. Like, we've got other things that we're worried about at the moment. Then you'll know, like, this is what happens. But as I mentioned, because we live in a world that's been so monocropped and that we have a hard time even imagining, to me, the best example, or one of the ones that just sort of resonates with besides medicine, which, in the United States is just insane because it is a market, kind of bizarre market. It's not even really a market. It's a market that's been manipulated for just unbelievable corporate profit. So it's almost like corporate socialism, right? It's this weird thing. But this is kind of what markets work towards. But anyway, everybody, I think, is pretty familiar with these problems. But even the debate currently that's raging around education, and, the Trump administration is attacking universities. This is all crazy. But there's all these arguments that are going around like, does education really pay anymore? Oh, we're going to control the universities by cutting the billions of dollars that the federal government gives them. Oh, there's all this debate. What are they all debating? Well, the carrot and the stick here is money. Right? This is the debate. Like, I mean, theoretically, there's values under there someplace that aren't just the money, but it's extraordinary. And then when I believe Harvard steps up and says, "Okay, you can cut off our funding. We wish you wouldn't, but we're not going to let go of our values just because you threaten our funding." And then a bunch of other universities line up. It's like, oh yeah, now what do you do? Right? Like, oh, this is interesting. It's not clear that if there's any other lever. And once all the universities, or many of them, just say, well, we don't care about your money. It's like, oh, well, I guess, right? Well, go about your business then, because we don't have much to let the federal government doesn't have a lot of other levers in theory to pull there. But on the student side, you also see this because you see like, oh, isn't education worth it anymore? Is it, how much will you make out of a job for how many years you go and how much your tuition costs? Hey, by the way, all these calculations are totally specious. Like, do not believe a single one of them because the variability is so high on what career you pursue, whether you decide to stay in it, what college you go to, what's college relevant. There's just so many variables that these back of the envelope calculations that people throw out there are just silly, right? They really are nearly meaningless. A lot of people pay way too much for their education, but not necessarily for the reasons that are listed, but simply because there were probably much lower cost and equally high quality options available for them. Similarly, you had, which are, sort of on the outs now, but you had the rise and fall-ish of all these online universities that made all these claims that, if you get a degree, you earn so much more. No. You got a degree and earned more before the rise of these, diploma mills saturated the market with crappy people who got crappy degrees, unbeknownst to them. And so all these people were told, if I get the degree, I'll get a, $80,000 a year job to start, and then they found out that that's not what education is about and not how it works. And so all these arguments about money and value and all this, right? You just listen and see how long it takes for someone to get around and talk about things like intellectual enrichment or global understanding or sense of efficacy in the world, or my favorite one for thinking about this, because it's easy for me to be biased towards philosophical and intellectual pursuits, is one way to conceptualize an education is simply it increases your degrees of freedom, because it gives you more opportunity to know the existence of more opportunities. Like, it's an opportunity to learn about opportunities, which definitely gives you a greater realm of choice. And second, and there's more than this, but I'll just stop with two, it gives you an opportunity to learn what it is you want and what you're interested in. And so it increases the likelihood that your outcome will be good because it helps you learn what a good outcome is, right? Does that make sense? So if I just let you tell me what a good outcome is, the chances that that will resonate with me are much less than if I get a good sense of myself and my world and I understand what a good outcome for me would be. My chances of success go way up, right? Like this isn't even a question. This is, I think, perhaps the single greatest power of education is it gives you, again, the opportunity to know about more opportunities and the capacity to understand for yourself what success would look like to you. You can believe me. You can read thousands of pages of articles and news announcements and little stories online, and no one talks about this. And it's just like, where did that go? This is the monocropping power of ideology. We know the answer. The answer is get job, make money. So what job pays the most money? Get that job. Those are the most in-demand majors. Why? Nobody knows. And hey, presto, the next thing you have is this crazy system that we're involved with, to the point where they've tried to adjust. Oh, anyway, I should not go on this tangent, but I'll just quickly. They've tried to adjust tuition in some places by major. So the majors that are high in demand and seem to have high earning capacity, they want to charge students more for those, right? Like it's a bidding war. Oh, well, that job pays a little bit more, so maybe I'll pay more for, but that's a crap job, so I'll pay less for that tuition, but then I get a better return, which is like sort of the apotheosis of all of this. And so as this system falters as it is, now people can ask not just, oh, is education worth it, but what is education for? Right? And once it starts to fall off of this values like return on dollar, then it opens up the possibility of answering what is an education for, to which there are a lot of answers. And because there's so many answers, this just erodes the capacity of the ideology to give you the correct answer. And that's where we are. More and more students are saying, hey, I want to be knowledgeable, I want to be informed, but maybe that's not part of getting an education, or anyways, all these other outputs. But this is happening all over the place in all kinds of different areas where people are starting to say, oh, just that simple feedback loop, I'm starting to question that. I'm really starting to ponder. And so this it creates diversity, as it were. It creates value diversity. Now, the downside of value diversity is we find it, again, confusing and unsettling. And so often what happens, and this is where I'll leave today before I move on to the conclusion in part 12, what happens is we get an overarching narrative that allows us to live with all the diversity and makes us feel better about that. And right now I have no idea what that overarching narrative could be. I mean, what it could be, I have some options. One could be like the whole environmental thing, the whole global warming environmental thing could say, we're not going to change everything, but we're going to do a lot of things underneath this umbrella. And there's going to be a lot of ways to approach this and a lot of different elements. And so while it may have nothing to do with you, it may impact your life in some ways or not, but you'll go, oh, it's happening within the context of something. So for instance, in the Ottoman Turkish Empire, they had a lot of different people. A lot of different people, different religions, different outlooks, different cultures, different languages, everything different civilizations. And they all worked together relatively, moderately, smoothly-ish for, several hundred years. And the way they pulled that off is by having a hierarchy of the Ottoman Turks. There were no Ottomans, by the way. There were very few. It was like one of these bizarre empires where the people who theoretically were in charge, there were very few of them. And then they had a lot of diversity underneath that. Or you could look at like the Roman Empire. There just weren't that many Romans. By the way, literally people from Rome, so that really cut down the population. But, the main territories around Rome. And so what this ended up being was a few Roman elites in a lot of places letting everybody just go about their business. However, that business was done under the purview of Rome. And so this had big influence on a lot of people all over the world, despite the fact that there was this great deal of underlying diversity. And yet, it's called the Pax Romana. If you were inside of it, it seemed peaceful. If you were on the edges of it, it seemed less peaceful. But it's called the Pax Romana because people kind of, even with this incredible diversity of languages and societies and legal systems and everything else, you're like, oh yeah, no, I kind of have this sense that something organized and meaningful is going on. So we're good with the diversity. We're good with the variety, the many gods, the many local deities, the different legal systems, the languages, the cultures, the entirely geographies, completely different. And yet, all under this umbrella. And you can even look at the Greek world and go, oh my gosh, look at the variety of Greek city-states and the way they were ruled and their religious orientations and the gods that they thought were important. I mean, they're vastly different. And yet, it was sort of a coherent, generally linguistically organized, sort of civilization. You can do that. And so I think this is where we're probably moving to, where we're going to have an outcropping of different groups of values that will be settled under some larger value that has, I don't know, it certainly hasn't come to the fore yet. Maybe we'll look back in 100 years and go, oh, that was the time when, something came to the fore and that allowed all these other diversity to feel more coherent. So, but I can say without a doubt, like where we are is in the time of confusion, and that's going to continue. That the notion that there's going to be some radical overnight change is probably highly unlikely from history. More likely that we'll just have these increasingly common sets of values that compete with or limit or undercut the classic capitalist narrative, which of course we're already seeing. And that as that increases, sort of both our freedom of movement and thought will increase, but this also tends to be disconcerting, which of course drives this desire to have a new overarching narrative under which we can shelter and feel that our world is coherent and makes sense. So that's where we'll leave off next time. So we're leaving the land of coherence and we're in the land of confusion. Don't expect revolutions because one will still be us even if there is a revolution. And we're searching for, and I think eventually we'll find some form or forms of overarching narrative to replace the capitalist ideology that has been driving us for the last few hundred years, particularly in the West. Thank you very much.